So here it is. I think we are live. So
Yeah.
just wanted to just welcome you all to Redemption and Recovery, when suppressed wounds begin to heal. I'm your host, Christina Jones. I have a lovely guest tonight. You all have seen her before in January, I believe. I think that was January. We were talking about anxiety, the mind. We talked about a lot of great stuff. So I'd like to welcome my special guest, Miss Lorena Jefferson. So thank you for being here.
Hello.
Hello,
Thank you for
hello.
having me.
Thank you for being here. So
Yes, I always enjoy it.
yes. So guys, this is my first time doing live via Zoom. So I hope you all can see me and see us. Let's see here. We're not able to see the comments for whatever reason, but we're going to go ahead and jump into it. We are recording live, so you all can come back and watch it. You can always go to Miss Lorena Jefferson's page to watch it as well. I will have her share her, I think it's called handles now. So we're going to get into it right now. The topic is healing the inner child. So where can I start? In February of this year, I started doing like these different videos with Tisera Okahi. Tisera Okahi, she does have a book out. I believe it's I Need Help. And she definitely have a lot of, knowledge, both personal and professional knowledge with dealing with sexual abuse, trauma, childhood abuse and trauma and things as such. So her and I had gotten together and we started doing like a 6-week series on sexual abuse in the Black community. However, once I seen a video clip, because what we were doing was we were recording ourselves in Zoom and then taking that recording and then chopping it up and editing the video to make them smaller videos to send people to our YouTube channel. Unfortunately, Tisera and I were not working together anymore. Nothing crazy happened or anything like that. It's just that I realized that I had some triggers that I needed to deal with. So let's dive into that. So during one of the recordings, I talked about an incident that happened to me when I was 3. And that was the very first time that I was sexually abused or sexually assaulted by a man. I told my mother who this person was, and I let her know what this person did to me. But this was my very first time actually like watching myself say this on on a video, a recorded video. And that did something to me that I thought that I was over, even though this person who did this to me, me and this person, we're very close. This person has asked me to forgive them. So that's why I thought I put it behind me. But that moment, seeing that, it's like I felt like I was that 3-year-old girl all over again. And I was getting ready to go into a downward spiral of depression, which led me to taking a break from social media. I wasn't gone that long, but I was gone long enough just because I felt like I couldn't deal with the situation that was going on. It even got to a point where I began to cry, and I felt like I was crying for that 3-year-old girl inside of me. And it's like for the first time, I let her know that it was okay for her to cry. Now, for people who think that's like, oh, that sounds weird, that sounds crazy, or whatever, it's our inner child. And that's why I have this wonderful lifestyle management coach, minister, Miss Lorena Jefferson, mental health, behavioral therapist, counselor, all this here, because I wanted to process this with you. I also wanted others to be able to know what the inner child is. What does the inner child inner child look like? And how can we move forward, dealing with the triggers? Because in that situation, like I said, when I see myself saying exactly what happened to me, like I didn't want to talk to this person. I didn't want to look at this person's pictures. I didn't want to, I really didn't want to talk to a whole lot of people. I did let a couple people know, like who are really, really close to me, exactly what was going on with me. And they prayed for me, but like I said, I was getting ready to go into a downward spiral, and I cried until I couldn't even breathe. And being on a platform as such, and me really wanting to help people, I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I couldn't. I felt like I didn't have a voice, you know? So then I started watching, I watched like the last series of the whole R. Kelly docuseries on Netflix. And one of these speakers on there, one of the young ladies has said, I can't heal if I'm hiding. So I said, let me come back to Facebook. Let me continue with the redemption and recovery, because I know that that God is doing a great work, and that his redemptive power still works. So with that being said, I know that was probably a lot that I unloaded, but what are your thoughts about that, Lorena? And also go ahead and introduce yourself. I'm sorry. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
No, that was great. Like, that's what it's about, right? It's really about coming to that place where you can find yourself. I always say God is simply trying to introduce you to you. And so you're all those parts. You're all those parts. And I learned that personally. But my name is Lorena Jefferson, for those who do not know. I am a mental health specialist. So I do work in mental health, but I am a lifestyle management coach. And so I deal with mind, body, and spirit, the wellness, the wholeness of the man. And so I have a company called Prestige, and Prestige is an acronym. And the acronym is for people realizing every strength through intellect, guidance, and empowerment. I know that that is my call. I've been able to be very successful at helping people, no matter where they are, to find themselves, to be able to live their authentic life, and to be able to come from under the hiding places, right? We'll say, and we'll talk more about that, but it's very important that the work that you do, it's important, because a lot of times it's just about permission. Can I have permission to speak? Can I have permission? Do I have a voice? And your show, it gives a voice to those who seem silent, for those who are suffering in silence. So thank you so much for what you do, because it's very important. And you're extremely brave for coming and sharing. It's very hard to share those type of things.
Yes, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Now you said permission to speak. I like that. So guys, as I'm looking down, I'm not looking at my phone, I'm just writing down notes, taking notes, because I love to just elaborate on what it is that our speaker is saying, so that we'll all get a full understanding.
Absolutely.
So, permission. How do you give? Well, let's back up. The inner child. What is the inner child?
The inner child. I'm trying to think of how to say it in a way that it will relate to everyone. So all of us grew up, right? We were born. And when we were born with nothing, right? Everything in our environment is what molded us into what we believed our rights and wrongs, our goods and bads. And so we were born as innocent children without someone to take care of you. You would have died. You didn't know how to eat. You didn't know how to take care of yourself.
Right.
Well, the same thing goes, because we are not just body, right? We are mind, body, and spirit. And so a body was born with a spirit and a mind, right? But that mind is pretty much like waiting to just be filled up like a sponge. like a sponge. And so every situation that happens between the age of 0 to 7, we're more in a hypnotic type of state than anything else. And what I mean about that is you think of babies and you think of how they develop. And so they start to make noises because they're watching and hearing sounds. They move their body because they're noticing how the bigger people are moving their bodies. They have tendencies, they catch little facial expressions. Everything you see about a baby is just a mini me of whatever and whoever is rearing that baby, whoever is influencing the baby. If a baby is missing those basic needs, we call them Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs. And so their basic needs, the need to be loved, the need to be safe, need to be a lot of things taken care of, because we know babies are innocent. They don't know how to do this. And so the people who take care of the child are the people who are doing what is called nurturing the child, protecting the child. Depending on how a child is nurtured, taken care of, if the child's needs are being met, then that child will come up and you will notice that they are confident children. They are very fearless almost, right?
Right.
But what happens is during those times, we're really just puppets. Babies are puppets. They imitate what they see, they do what they see, they do what they got permission to do, and that's how they develop, as ages and stages of development. Well, while those moments are happening, there is a recording, just like you're writing that down. The
Right.
mind is recording. That's how we learn. That's how we know how to walk. That's how we know how to talk. Because we're recording everything that we're seeing.
Right.
That is your subconscious, that's your mind part, right? Mind, body, spirit. And so the mind is recording everything that it's seeing, everything that it is getting from the environment. After a while, it starts to process on its own and take in what its perception of what is happening is. And so we continue to evolve, our bodies continue to evolve, but there are things that can happen in our life experience while we're physically evolving. There are things that are also happening emotionally, and we're growing emotionally the same exact way that we're growing physically. And so what is happening is we're being programmed emotionally, emotionally and physically. And so the inner child is that part of you that was innocent. The innocent child is that part, the inner child is that part of you that wants to stay free. It wants to adventure. It doesn't have fear. It doesn't have any type of hindrances unless it was reared in an environment that was not safe, unless it was obstructed that hope, unless the spirit was crushed, unless they had to deal with things that children should not have to deal with. Although we programmed into our mind the good things, we also programmed into our mind the traumas. We also programmed into our mind the negativities. We also programmed into our mind not just the good experiences, but also the ones who were not so good, the things that hurt us. And so the inner child is not always a negative thing. The inner child itself is the innocence of us. It's the part of us that we were created to be. I call it the authentic self. So that's pretty much how I can break that down for you.
Thank you. Thank you for saying it, because that kind of like aligns with the definitions I have written down. So I'll read it here. According to integrative psychotherapy, they define inner child as being part of your subconscious that has been picking up messages way before it was able to fully process what was going on mentally and emotionally, like you had said. It holds emotions, memories, beliefs from the past, as well as hopes and dreams for the future. And then also our inner child pretty much it remembers the person, place, or thing that caused excitement, trauma, or even torment.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And even like the other aspect of it is like about what you were saying, wanting to stay free, free as a child, you know.
Mhm.
And I think that, it was a lot of things that had transpired in my life, you know, but to go back to that, and here it is, that's been like well over 30 years ago. And I thought that it was over. So it's definitely possible for someone to be in their 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe even 90s, who may be triggered by something that happened to them in those stages of life, early childhood.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I do see here that the feelings that we have, the feelings are stored into the region of our brain that's called the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And then we have the prefrontal cortex, which is intelligently regulates our thoughts, actions, and emotions through extensive connections with other brain regions, such as the amygdala, which experiences emotions, the fight or flight response, and it stores your
Absolutely.
responses for future use. And some of that stood out from a video I was watching last night with the sister in Christ, Eugenia Bewley, and she was talking about childhood abuse, which was really, really good, and kind of flowed into everything. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak more about what it was that I mentioned, because I know you do, as a mental health professional.
Well, the psychological aspects of how it happened is explained in a scientific way that's not really relative in a way.
Right,
If nobody understands what it is
right.
biology, right? The
Mhm.
storage places, the cracks and the crevices. In my book, The Heart of the Matter, I just call it falling asleep.
Wow.
I call it falling asleep because it needs to be made relative, because it's exactly the same. While you're growing and while you're developing and you're experiencing these things, some things are just, they cannot psychologically be handled without it being a break. And so sometimes we put certain parts to sleep. And what happened with you is probably that. You put that part to sleep, it was too painful to deal with. And so that area, it was like, let me move on, because by nature, physically, you're always going to continue to evolve. And so you can continue to evolve without emotionally evolving in every area of your life. Emotionally evolving is negotiable. Physical evolution is not negotiable. But
Mm.
your psychology, your psychological health takes care of itself, and it monitors the amount of pressure that a person feels as though they can handle. And so a lot of disorders, a lot of different things can arrive when there's too much pressure on a person's mind. And so a lot of times with trauma, you will see that people will have flashbacks and triggers because they put it away because it was too painful. It's not abnormal. It's actually very common for
Okay.
that same thing to happen in many people in many circumstances.
Thank you for that. Now, what is trigger for those who don't understand what a trigger is?
Right. A trigger is a situation, place, or thing, person, anything that causes you to remember something else. It's like pulling the trigger of a gun. You click, the gun shoots off. Something happens in your life, some memory, you watching a movie, you watching a clip, me saying something, um, your husband saying something. Triggers are just reactions to memories or situations that caused a certain type of discomfort. And so what happens is then when there's a memory or something similar to it, it can cause you to remember. Once you remember, then you react. And so the triggers are things that causes you to remember things, even if it's good things. Triggers are not bad. They're just like, it's like a stimulant, like it'll just shock you,
Right.
where
Right.
you hear something or see something and then it reminds you of something else. In trauma, of course, is trauma. But then there are other things where you may see a flower and that type of flower was the first flower your husband gave you. And so it triggers a beautiful moment or beautiful thought. So it's just something that causes something else to react in some sort of way or respond.
Right. And I think the beautiful thing about, well, let's say the beautiful thing about triggers is that I never really fully embrace the other side of triggers. Like you said, it could be the smell of a flower. Because the moment that you said that, like we used to have when I grew up in the house that we had a huge magnolia tree in the front yard. And I would pick the magnolia flowers and give them to my mom. So
Mhm.
it's like I once you said that, you said, something beautiful, that just kind of sparked something within me, and that memory came back and it was a pleasant memory. So
Right.
would it be possible to offset negative triggers with positive triggers?
I would not, I wouldn't say that the word offset. That's kind of like,
Okay. Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
but for your psyche, for your health, for your well-being, it would be great to have more things that trigger you in a positive manner than a negative manner. If that's the question, because it's very important to understand that unless we deal with our triggers,
Okay.
we're always going to have like a rabbit response. And so I don't want to say it like offset, like we need to.
Oh, oh, you're on mute, Lorena. Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. We
It's
need
okay.
to um we need to accept the triggers. Acceptance is a big deal. It's the hardest part, is why a lot of people die having never lived,
Mm,
because it's a very challenging task to accept your triggers, because the triggers bring the memories. They
right.
don't come without it. They come together. And so if we don't want to remember, then we pretend that we haven't been triggered. And so what happens though is the reality is that we have, and whether it's in front of people or late in the midnight hour, it comes back to say hello.
Now, how do you accept those triggers? What does that look like?
Okay, so I'm gonna use my example because I am the coach who coaches through her life.
Yes.
And I do that for a reason, because the more people see others coming out of the darkness into the light, the more we give them permission again to do the same. And so I've spent my life and my career talking about those things, talking about things that that I've experienced. And so I'm going to give you an example for myself.
Okay.
So when I was a child, I was very young, and I used to, I was abused a lot. So I was a victim, I've shared before. I
Right.
was a victim of sexual, emotional, physical abuse by the time I was 7, right? I was already in foster care. I could tell you more than a 7-year-old ever should have been able to tell you about anything
Right.
as far as sexual situations. So what I've done to accept my triggers is I help other people with the trigger. So I talk about it. I talk about how I've had to use my pain to help other people with their purpose. So when I figured out that my pain had purpose, it no longer challenged me to talk about it. It no longer challenges me. I no longer have shame because there's more room out than in. And so when I held it in, I felt shame. I felt like I was never, ever going to be a real person. But when I put it out there and I started talking about it, then I have no shame because it's already out there. What am I going to be ashamed about? Like I've already talked to people and told them, listen, I was hurt as a child, but now I'm taking those childhood hurts and trying to keep other children from being hurt by educating people, by talking about the effects of abuse, by talking about how it affects the psychology, how it affects the psyche of a person who's been abused. The challenges that we face are challenges that are great when it comes to your emotional stability. But the more I talk about my struggle through it, the more I talk about how I came through it, how it's possible, how it seems like it's more empowering when I talk about it, that it gave me strength. So now my pain has purpose and I accept my pain because I see that it does good for others. So I accept it. I lay down with it every night. I don't try to forget that I was an abused child. I don't try to forget who abused me. I don't try to forget any of those things. I don't deal with those people, but that's because I choose not to deal with those people, but not because I have an issue with the people. It's because I live in reality. And what is the reality? My reality is that we're all just making choices. And if someone chooses to do whatever they choose to do, then choices have consequences.
Exactly.
And that's my reality. And I don't pretend that people are different than what they've shown me to be, if that makes sense.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
In the segment, so Eugenia, I know Eugenia is watching. So I wrote down a lot of notes from her segment last night, and someone has said that shame is basically losing the ability to make a decision. And I love how you said you're coaching. What did you say? You said you coaching. Hold on, I wrote it down. Coaching others through coaching yourself. The coach who coach others.
Oh yeah, I'm the coach who coaches through her life.
Coaches through her life. Thank you for that.
Yes.
So I love that. I love that. And then you're saying some ways to deal with those triggers is by just talking about the triggers. Learning that our pain has a purpose. Talk about it, accept it for what it is, and not having to really interact or deal with those individuals who cause you said pain. But how do you deal with situations where that person may still be in your life? Like, say if I have teenagers that might be watching this and maybe their abuser might be a parent or a foster parent or a grandparent or someone who is taking care of them. So how will we deal with something like that if the abuser is in the home?
If the abuser is in the home, again, children are innocent.
All right.
I was innocent, you were innocent. There was really nothing we could do. There was nothing we could do. We now have a generation, society has changed. So we're educating children. They know now that they can tell a teacher or another adult. They know that they can reach out to someone. Now, the dynamic behind that is kind of strange because most children, no matter who's hurting them, they still are in protection mode of a parent. They still love their parent. They still love whoever it is. And what happens is they get stuck. So even though they are interacting with adults who probably could help them, because really only adults can help them, if they live in those situations, a lot of times they will be like you and I and many other people who will become adults before we really get to deal with anything
Right.
unless they have enough strength to
Mhm.
say to a teacher, my dad is doing this, or my mom is doing this, or my grandfather is doing this. The
Right.
odds are very, very slim because that's their family, the emotional ties. They're already confused about why this person is doing that and the fact that they love the person. So it sends them into a lot of confusion. And that's where we end up getting a lot of people who literally could be 50 years old in age, but their emotional maturity may be 5, 7, 10, 13, being around adults, no matter who they are, and they just, the least amount of conflict, they just shut down. They can't even function. They avoid it like the plague.
Mhm.
You'll see adults doing that because a lot of times their emotional stability has to do with their ability to process the information or to do anything responsibly with it. But if they shut down emotionally at 5 because they were being abused or hurt or something happened at 5 or 6 or 7, you may meet him at 50 and marry him at 50, but you're really only dealing with an emotional level of an 11-year-old. And so when there's conflict in the marriage, it's the shutdown, avoidance, whatever. When there's conflict at the job, it's the shutdown, avoidance, whatever. And the person will never stand up and face anything. But we think it, we're good for saying different words like coward and but that's a lot of people. It's about their inner child. Their inner child emotionally stopped growing at whatever age their greatest trauma it was experienced. And so again, physically, we don't have a choice. We continue to evolve. Emotionally, we do have a choice. And if it's too hard, then we just shut it down and we continue to grow physically, but not emotionally.
Yes. Emotional intelligence is very important. And I love how my sister is teaching my nieces that. I have a niece, Miss Jordan she's 4, and Miss Jade, I believe she'll be 9 next month. And those little girls, like, you talk to them, they can tell you what they're feeling, how they feel, what they're thinking, and I think that's so important to instill that in a child, very at a very young age, so then they'll be able to communicate with you about, again, their feelings, their emotions. That's very important. And one of the things too is that I think growing up, I wouldn't say just, as I'm evolving, and being around different cultures and ethnicities, it's not just the Black community that says, what happens in this house stays in this house. There's different people who are growing up like that. And I think that whole mindset of what happens in this house stays in this house is destroying a lot of people. But as you mentioned, once we become empowered to share our story, to talk about these things, to talk about the triggers and being transparent in certain groups and certain circles, then that helps us to empower other people.
Absolutely.
And
That's a good.
and to feel that it's safe. I want to take a quick moment to read from this book. There's a book titled Restored by Alice Taylor, and she talks about inner child work. And one of the paragraphs I wanted to read was this: you cannot change the past, but as a grown woman or grown man, you are now capable of acknowledging the little girl's pain of nurturing her, comforting her, giving her as much love as she needs. You are in a place where you can look back and acknowledge what she needed and what was taken from her. Give her a safe place to cry, let her grieve, be vulnerable, and allow her to name her pain. So, like you were saying, giving yourself permission. of whatever it is. You know, it could be giving yourself permission to feel what it is that you need to feel in that moment. And even though, you know, I wrote the book, I put the book out, and I've shared the story briefly. But again, seeing myself and hearing myself say those things, it's like, hold on, I thought I was done with that. And
Right.
it doesn't mean that I'm, you know, like I had a setback, but if I would have remained in that moment for much longer, who knows where I would be at today, you know. And I believe that God does things. He divinely places us with certain people, or he, you know, he's always speaking to us. He speaks to us through nature. He speaks to us through his word. He speaks to us through other people. And
Right.
me, again, hearing exactly what Javante Cunningham had said, which was, I can't heal if I'm hiding. And I'm like, whew, I need to come out. I need to come out, and I need to talk about it, because
Right.
again, somebody else may be experiencing the same thing. And they're afraid, they're in hiding, they don't want to come out. But again, it's almost like the arrested development, where you said you're still that same age of which you were violated or experienced that most traumatic event in your life. And if we don't acknowledge that, my husband, he helps me with my notes sometimes with the shows. So he said, you know, if we do not acknowledge that the work needs to be done, let me say exactly what he said, because I don't know if he in the comments. He said, in order for the inner child to be healed, there must be an acknowledgement of where the issue came from. And we kind of talked about a lot of that as well. So let me go back to my questions for you. So examples and symptoms of someone needs. Okay, so here it is. What are some examples? You kind of touched on a little bit about, you know, some people may use the word coward, or, you know, they're avoiding situations, but can you think of any other symptoms of someone needing inner childhood healing?
Inner childhood healing, there's not many people who don't need inner childhood healing.
Yes.
There's not many people at all, if any,
Mhm.
simply because everybody has a story, right? Some just not as damaged as others. But some of the things with the inner child is usually recognized by the individual themselves first. And so, you know, when, even though you're a good actress, you may know when something hits you wrong in a conversation and you're like, why am I feeling this way? You know, and then it reminds you of some else, or you're in having a conversation and someone raises their voice and all of a sudden you get like really scared, or um someone gets a little like really stern with you and you just feel like you're shrinking into a corner like a little girl, and you see you're still standing there, but you real in your mind you just clock out, I'm done, like you
Mhm.
don't hear anything else. um when you're in a conflictual situation, you just can't find the words, like you just lose, you know, and you get really antsy about it and you feel very insecure. If you get around people and you feel very small, you know, you could be around people and you still feel very much alone.
Mhm.
If you see that you are creating new people just to be around certain people to impress them, you feel like you need their affirmations. You need them to approve of you. You make up things just so that you can get attention, even if it's negative attention. You are always thinking about how you can be like someone else or have what someone else has, or when you are having issues where you are like comparing yourself constantly to other people. We do this a lot. We do it a lot. And comparing yourself to other people, well, she's got this degree, now I'm gonna get this degree, or she's
Mhm.
seemed like she and her husband, um, they have a great communication style. So I'm gonna switch up my husband's my communication style. Always comparing and matching and looking at someone else as your guideline or your affirmity to your identity. And so we do that in so many, many ways, always in competition. If you find you're always feeling like you got to compete, if you see someone doing well, you cannot celebrate them. That's a big one. You know, you see them doing well, or you may want something and you see someone has achieved that something, whether it be a house, a spouse, whatever, and you've been waiting and you both have been waiting, but you can't even celebrate because you're too busy, you know, feeling jealous or envious of someone else.
Right.
That's why I say almost everyone needs inner child, because the inner child is the insecurity that you feel. The inner child is the sadness. The inner child is the neglect, the abandonment. The inner child struggles with all of the psychological components of a broken heart, of a broken mind. And so we all need inner child work. Indicators are only really identified by the individual because they really know themselves. So they know if they're not being authentic. They know if they're making things up. They know how they feel in their heart, even though their best friend is getting married and they've been walking with them for 15 years and the best friend is getting married, and in their heart, they can't even be happy for them because they're like, what about me?
Right.
You know, and so it's just the inner child. So a child does not process information well. They don't process the way an adult does, so they don't handle it the way the adult does. The child throws tantrums when they don't get their way.
And also that inner child who is, here it is, we're in these big grown up adult bodies because we're evolving
Mhm.
and we have to continue to grow. Um, that inner child who is unhealed can also throw a temper tantrum through a 45-year-old man, you know, or
It
75-year-old
happens